Thank you for joining us today. I'm Terie Norelli, House Democratic Leader. And certainly with crossover complete, we wanted to do a little recap of the highlights and, unfortunately, the lowlights of the first half of the session. But before we talk about that, I want to take a moment to address an incident that happened recently in the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. Unfortunately, I think that incident epitomizes the misplaced priorities and insulting attitude that this Republican majority has demonstrated to people across our state. In discussing a bill that would have updated our rape statutes to remove the terms mentally defective, Rep. Ken Crease said of a rape victim with disabilities, quote, "She had her whole life to get used to being called defective." Rep. Jason Antos also supported keeping the phrase, saying that defective and retarded are, quote, "just words." These were outrageous and insensitive insults to rape victims and to people with disabilities. I don't believe that they represent New Hampshire values. But unfortunately, these words and actions epitomize what we have seen from the Republican majority: insults and attacks for anyone who disagrees with them, and disregard for the needs and rights of women and the needs and rights of people with disabilities. And this bill, which had already been recommended to pass by the Criminal Justice Committee, was sent back to the committee for a second look, reportedly at the request of Republican leadership. Speaker O'Brien has made it a point to punish legislators who disagree with him, going so far as to removing from their committee those members who disagree with him and who stand up for their constituents and their communities. Speaker O'Brien should condemn these outrageous comments. I'm left wondering if he will remove them from the Criminal Justice Committee, because it certainly appears to me that they have no interest in listening to or serving the needs of crime victims. Finally, I would call on the Speaker to support and the House to pass this legislation. And now on to the crossover recap. The actions of the Republican majority speak louder than their words. The Republican majority has undermined efforts to bring new jobs to New Hampshire. They had promised to focus on the economy and jobs. Instead, they have focused their attention on social issues and a radical agenda, with multiple bills attacking women's health care, legislation to upend contracts that exist between workers and their employers, an effort to overtake Medicare, even more efforts to dismantle public education, and bills that undermine basic public safety. Republican leadership moves forward with every bad idea they can find. They have even pushed through multiple bills that their own committees and leadership have determined to be harmful, like the plan to take over the Medicare, the plan to defund Planned Parenthood, to repeal workforce housing, and the list goes on and on. From refusing to give public notice of votes, to taking seats away from disabled legislators for disagreeing with him, to overriding Republican committee recommendations, Bill O'Brien has corrupted the legislative process. In the past 3 months alone, this House has passed 7 more gun bills, 8 bills cutting women's access to health care, 8 bills undermining the rights and safety of workers, 5 more bills attacking public education, made at least 5 attacks on the judicial branch, and even 1 bill planning for a state takeover of Medicare for seniors. I'm going to ask now Representatives Shurtleff, Richardson, and then Rosenwald to address more specifically a few of the policy areas that are of particular concern.
Thank you, Terry. Good morning. My name is Steve Shurtleff. I'm a retired supervisory deputy U.S. Marshal, and I serve on the House Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. Under the House Republican leadership, working-class families have been called names and have seen their livelihoods attacked. This is no way to treat our police officers, firefighters, teachers, and thousands of other state and municipal employees. The House Republican leadership has passed several bills that would upend the contracts between workers and employers, which force the state government into the employer-employee relationship. Last week, the Senate Commerce Committee voted to pass an amended version of House Bill 1677, turning this year's version of Right to Work into the identical twin of the Right to Work legislation. And today, the Senate will vote once again on last year's so-called Right to Work bill. Last fall, House Democrats worked with House Republicans to sustain Governor Lynch's veto on this out-of-state special interest-backed bill. After not getting their way last year, Speaker O'Brien just can't take no for an answer. But I'm confident that if the Senate passes this bill, the House again will sustain Governor Lynch's veto. We have seen House Republican leadership undermine public safety in pursuit of their gun-first agenda. And let me say that I'm an advocate for the Second Amendment. I own guns, and at one time in my life I was an NRA member. But beginning last year, when they voted to allow guns in the State House, in the House chamber, and then passed Shoot First legislation that was opposed by New Hampshire's law enforcement community and vetoed by Governor Lynch. This dangerous law allows the use of deadly force on street corners, in shopping malls, public parks, retail stores, and other public places. Drug dealers and other felons who brandish weapons will be further emboldened to use their weapons, while persecution and prosecution of those criminals will be made more difficult because of this bill's expansion of the right to use deadly force. A few weeks before Governor Lynch vetoed this terrible legislation, a man was arrested for brandishing a shotgun in Pembroke Park after a drug transaction turned into an altercation. Fortunately, no one was injured in that case. But what if the drug dealer felt threatened? He would be justified in using deadly force. That's not right. That's why the New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police, the New Hampshire Sheriff's Association, the New Hampshire Troopers Association, and representatives of over 40 local law enforcement departments and the current and former attorneys general have warned that this bill would jeopardize public safety. This year, House Republican leadership has continued their focus on guns, passing an additional 7 bills, including one that would have mandated guns be allowed in dormitories and classrooms at our public colleges. New Hampshire has always had a tradition of common sense and responsible public safety laws. However, House Republican leadership has passed rules and laws that jeopardize our status as the safest state of the nation. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Gary Richardson. I'm the Democratic floor leader in the House. In his quest for power, the Speaker and House Republican leadership has repeatedly violated the separation of power between the 3 co-equal branches of government by passing unconstitutional legislation and corrupting the rule of law in New Hampshire. There's been bill after bill seeking to force the Attorney General to engage in lawsuits against the federal government or preventing cooperation with the federal government by the state of New Hampshire. There have been at least 5 bills attacking the independence of the judiciary, including a proposed constitutional amendment to repeal the ability of the judicial branch to make its own rules. The Speaker has sought and obtained the power to subpoena witnesses as part of his effort to control Health and Human Services, an executive branch agency, and in the process invade the confidentiality of child protection proceedings, a confidentiality based upon protecting the rights of children. The Redress of Grievances Committee is acting like a grand jury conducting McCarthy-style investigations in a kangaroo court far beyond anything ever contemplated by our Constitution. House Republican leadership likes to claim that it's focusing on jobs, but most of its attention this year has been given to narrow Tea Party agenda that will continue to undermine our future economic growth. Last year, at the same time, this legislature cut the tobacco tax and caused loss of revenue from tax evaders by eliminating state auditors. They cut aid to higher education in half. They passed on to local taxpayers a costly and disruptive bill that forces schools to develop alternative individual lesson plans for any student at any parent's demand. They've continued their anti-education crusade this year, passing a bill aimed at overturning the decisions of local school boards who decide to use a particular education method. Why? Because the International Baccalaureate program has the word international in it. And they are pushing an expensive school voucher program that will cost local schools millions a year, driving up local property taxes. Most business leaders say that the future of New Hampshire's economy will depend on an educated workforce. The House Republican leadership seems ideologically committed to a program that will in fact undermine our students, our schools, and our state government at every turn. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Cindy Rosenwald, and I'm the Deputy Democratic Floor Leader. Nowhere is the radical agenda of this House more clear than in the war it has waged on women's access to health care. This legislature voted to overturn a 12-year-old bipartisan law guaranteeing equity in prescription drug coverage to women. In New Hampshire, do we really want the owner of a business to be able to deny contraceptive coverage? And I should add that guaranteed access to contraception has led to New Hampshire having the lowest teen birth rate in the entire nation. Back in January, the Republicans passed House Bill 228 in order to fulfill their obsession with defunding organizations like Planned Parenthood. This ideologically extreme legislation would completely eliminate all funding for basic preventive health care services, services such as access to birth control and cancer screening that are received by over 16,000 New Hampshire men and women at Planned Parenthood centers, some hospitals, and any health facilities that offer full reproductive health care. This bill would also put New Hampshire at risk of losing $1.2 billion in federal Medicaid funds. This policy is bad for our families, bad for our communities, and bad for our state. In all, this legislature has passed 8 bills directly related to women's health care. In fact, they even passed a bill that would take away insurance coverage for midwives. When House Republicans are not focused on repealing contraception coverage or defunding basic preventive health care services for New Hampshire's women, they are voting to undermine health care in other ways. And now they've even voted to plan for the legislature to take over Medicare for seniors. The State Committee on Aging called this proposal potentially disastrous. And disastrous is what all their health care bills have been. Now I'll turn it back to Terie.